So with Firebase set up, how do we communicate with it or with any backend from inside our Vue app? We actually accidentally already saw a way of sending HTTP requests earlier. In our form, the learning survey component here in the form, there we have a submit button. And I mentioned earlier in the course that we want to prevent the browser default when that form is being submitted, because if we don't do this, a HTTP request would be sent. If I remove the prevent modifier here temporarily, reload, and click submit, watch this reload icon here. You see, it briefly turned into a cross. Every time I click this, what happens is that the browser uses its default behavior, which is to send a HTTP request. The problem just is it's not sending that request to our backend, to our Firebase service, but instead it sends the request to the same address that was used for serving this page. And with Vue applications, that is typically not the page that should handle this request. In this case, it's our local computer, and our local computer does not have any code expecting this request. So therefore, this default request goes into the void. Now, you could be building applications where you also use Vue, where your Vue app is served by the same server that should be handling the request. In that case, this browser default might be fine. But in the vast majority of cases, you'll have a separate server for your Vue app, which is just delivering this Vue app to your users, than you have for handling all the user data. And that's exactly the scenario where you don't want this browser default, but where instead you want to prevent it and handle the submitted data in JavaScript with Vue. For example, also to validate it and show such a client-side error message. So show this error paragraph, for example. That is something you might want to do. And once you validate it, you then want to take the data and send it to the server of your choice, not necessarily to the same server that is serving this application. And that's exactly what we want to do here. So how do we send a request to Firebase then, which is our chosen backend in this case? Well, the nice thing about this Firebase service, and there the real-time database, is that it has this HTTP address, which you see here. And if you send a request of a specific format to this address, the data will automatically be picked up by Firebase and will be written to a database. Now, it might look like we're directly talking to a database with that, but we actually aren't. This is a HTTP address that leads to some server-side code, which we can't see, which was written by the Firebase team, which parses the request that will be sent by us, and then extracts data and then writes it to a database. So for us, it will look like we're directly talking to a database, but we actually aren't. But this is the address, or part of the address, to which we want to send a request. And of course, make sure you pick the address you are seeing in your dashboard, not mine. This address will not be available anymore when you're viewing this course. So we want to send a request to that. But how do we now send a request from inside our Vue code here? Well, there are a couple of options. We can use third-party packages like Axios, which is a very popular JavaScript package for sending HTTP requests from inside JavaScript. It's very powerful and very easy to use, and definitely worth a look. Alternatively, browsers also have built-in methods for sending HTTP requests. Precisely, there is the fetch method, which sounds like it's only there to fetch data, but it's actually a function that allows us to send data to servers as well. Fetch takes a URL as a first argument, and then we can configure it to get data from that URL or to send data to that URL. And I'm going to work with fetch here since it's built into the browser, but you could absolutely also look into packages like Axios. Both Axios and Fetch will send so-called behind-the-scenes HTTP requests. That means that we won't reload the page, our application will not be killed and restarted. Instead, the Vue application will continue running and the HTTP request is just sent, well, behind the scenes to our backend. And that's exactly the behavior we want here. We want to ensure that our request is sent without restarting the application.